Greetings, Super Horror family and ghostly guests, and welcome to another spine-chilling video on your favorite YouTube channel of horrors, Super Horror Show. For anyone that's new here, I'm your sinister storyteller, the Baron of the Bizarre, the Viceroy of the Vile, Papa Bones. And tonight we're embarking on a journey through the darkest corners of history, unearthing tales of terror that have been buried deep within the yellowed pages of old newspapers. So gather round, my frightful friends, as we delve into the ghostly past to discover the most hair-raising, spine-tingling, and bone-chilling scary history moments. But be warned, these are not your ordinary bedtime stories. These are accounts of the paranormal that have long been forgotten, and only now we're dusting off the cobwebs to bring them back to life. Much like me on this channel. Now, without further ado, let's open the creaky door to the past and take a stroll down the dimly lit corridors of history. If you dare.
Evening World, July 10th, 1888. There was a haunted house in the city of Chicago, an attractive two-story house located at number 126 Langley Avenue. Even though the house is in a reputable neighborhood and is in excellent shape, the owner is unable to rent it. 10 years ago, 3 sisters lived on the property. 2 older sisters, Elizabeth, who was 43 years old, and Anna, who was 40, looked after their half-wit sister Nora, who was 25 years old at the time. The 3 of them were not rich, but did have some money and property. They dressed well and appeared to eat well. Overall, the sisters had a good reputation with their neighbors and the people they knew. But on the evening of July 21st, 1879, a police officer was summoned to the house. When he arrived, things were strange. He decided it would be a good idea to have a look around. Because of the late hour, the house was fairly dark, so the officer used his lantern to illuminate the rooms as he walked through them. After searching the ground floor to his satisfaction, the officer started up the stairs. That's where he found the 2 older sisters, Elizabeth and Anna, hanging. The official report claimed the act was self-inflicted for both sisters. Some locals had their doubts. Within a week, the house was for rent. But the horrific tragedy that took place there was all the locals would talk about. Potential renters would go out of their way to avoid the house, including walking across the street as they neared it to avoid walking in front of it. After a while, stories about the house began to appear. Servant girls on their way to church would say they could see old maids moving in and out of the rooms of the house through the windows. Strange noises were also reported. Screaming, shrieking, yelling, and moaning have all been reported to come from the empty house. Intellectuals in town were quick to make jokes about the reported hauntings, but none of them would rent the house even if the need arose. The house remained vacant for years. Finally, a tenant was found, a family that hadn't heard of the tragedy or the hauntings that followed after it. Within a week, they moved into another house. Their house servant reported every morning the furniture would be arranged differently than it was the night prior, and the sound of footsteps walking around could clearly be heard in the dead of night. The owner lowered the rent and decided to warn potential tenants of what he called the alleged hauntings. Many people laughed off the idea of the house being haunted and would rent the house because the rent was priced below market value. None of them stayed very long. It appears this one tragedy has somehow supernaturally stained this property, making it unrentable. Being unable to think of any way to rid the house of these ghost tenants, the property owner is having the house completely demolished and rebuilt. A very large expense, considering the house did not need any repairs.
The stories in this video are not stories at all, but articles. Articles about paranormal events that were published in real newspapers 100 years ago. I often wonder about possession. Why would a ghost want to possess someone? What does it feel like? How much is the person being possessed aware of? In today's article, we hear about a possession that takes place in San Jose in the 1870s. There is a girl in San Jose that is being possessed. When the possessing spirit was being questioned, it answered through the mouth of the little girl and said,
I was what you call a bushwhacker, and was killed by this girl's father. And, as I still feel a spirit to rebel against him, I have taken control of her to further my designs. I have nothing against the girl and intend to do her no harm.
The possessing spirit continued on, explaining things that happened between itself and the little girl's relatives. These events have been confirmed true by the little girl's family. The little girl's relatives sent her to a private asylum in Alameda County, thinking she would pose less of a threat to herself under the asylum's care. After spending a little time at the asylum, the ghost left her, and she is no longer disturbed. But it appears the girl's father has now been taken over by this revengeful monster, as he is acting exactly as she was before she was admitted. I wonder why the spirit didn't just go after the dad first. Maybe it was important to the spirit for the family to see he meant the girl no harm, but intended to offer the dad great personal violence. If he just jumped into the dad first, everyone might just assume he was an evil spirit, and not just a ghost possessing a person that killed him. Really, the dad might be the bad guy here. Hey, have you ever thought about how being a bad guy could be, well, you know, bad? Well, if I got a deal for you, welcome to the Church of Me. Send me $1 a month on Patreon and get that good feeling of being a good person. Your dollar will go to my food, shelter, and to buying presents for my family, just like a real church. So don't delay. Give yourself the warm fuzzies by sending me $1 today. Info in the description. Turns out that ghost possessing people in the article was pretty lazy. The dad only had to do 10 push-ups to exercise him out. Get it? Exercise? I think it must be hard to come back as a ghost. Otherwise, everyone would do it. That's why when we hear about a ghost, we often hear about crimes of passion and unfinished business. But we aren't all built the same. In today's article, we get to learn of an old miser that loved his money so much he may have even come back for it. On a lonely road in the suburbs of Cleveland stands a solitary house that is the talk of the neighbors due to the supernatural events taking place inside of it. The house is currently occupied by a family, but they are currently preparing to leave. At all times of the day and night, sounds can be heard in different rooms of the house. At times, a banging noise can be heard so loud that the sound frightens the people in a neighboring house, many rods away. The house has been watched several times now to see if the hauntings are authentic, and as of right now, there appears to be no alternate explanation for the goings-ons in the house. The house was previously lived in by an old miser. While no one disagrees that the old man was greedy and hoarded money, some neighbors claim he had a bad reputation
for other reasons as well. Now he walks the house, banging on the walls. Neighbors that knew the man well speculate he is trying to draw attention to a large sum of gold that mysteriously disappeared around when he died.
Poor guy. I guess no one told him he couldn't take his money with him. He must have really loved gold. Think about it. I've known people that have loved their husbands, wives, families, and they didn't get to come back. But this guy gets his money stolen, and he gets to make the trip? Is he part of the ghost IRS? Too bad he wasn't a Patreon. Then he could have enjoyed bonus videos while he was alive and spent time making trouble with me. If bonus videos and making trouble with Papa Bones sounds like something you're interested in, join me on Patreon for just $1 a month. www.patreon.com/superhorrorshow. So it turns out the old miser was only trying to get the attention of the woman living in what was his house. Her name was Penny. Huh? Huh? Aw, come on, guys. I thought that joke was priceless. There's a time in everyone's life when they finally know everything. For me, it was when I was 15. It was great. I was invincible. Then I got dumped, and it was invincibility over. And I knew nothing again. That's roughly how it goes for most of us. But there are some people that never grow out of it. Full-grown adults running around acting like they know what's going on, even though they don't have a clue. Hey! Pay attention to me! I'm talking to you! I'm a good pay attentioner, the best pay attentioner. Ask anyone. Anyone will tell you. I'm a billionaire. Who can afford to pay more attention than me? Not Sleepy Joe here. Also, did you notice how big my hands are? And another thing.
Ulster County appears to be a preferred place for ghosts to haunt. Just last winter, there was excitement about a haunting at the Dunn residence, but the most recent haunting is different. It is not occurring at one residence, but appears to be moving about the neighborhood as it pleases. Within Ulster County is a thinly settled farm town situated at the foot of the Shawangunk Mountains, called Log Town. In this town is a family named Rose, and Lewis Rose was its head, known as Old Man Rose to his neighbors. Old Man Rose was an outspoken and eccentric man. He despised the Christian religion and all religious instruction. He would often carry on about how he didn't fear hell or any punishment, and insisted there would not be a clergyman officiating his funeral. He was also illiterate, and could not eloquently explain his thoughts on any complex matter. He did, however, have one secret fear: the fear of being buried alive. Approximately 1 year ago, Old Man Rose became very ill. In the hours leading up to his death, he carried on, shouting and cursing and thrashing about in his bed, but in his last moments, he became strangely calm and called his wife to him. He told her Satan was after him, that he could hear the rattling of the chains. Then he made her a promise: if he could find a way to break free from the chains, he would come back. He was still terrified by the idea of being buried alive, so he asked his wife to keep his body for 8 days, then place his body in the field for the crows to eat. His wife and friends tried to oblige, but they had no way to preserve the old man's body. His body began decomposing almost immediately after death, but by the 5th day, the smell was so unbearable that he was buried. Now, the promise Old Man Rose made to his wife about breaking free from Satan and returning was known only to the Rose family. They didn't tell anyone, nor did they look for Old Man Rose, as they expected him to act as all other dead people act. Now, a year later, many people believe he has come back. His ghost has reappeared recently. It was night, but a full moon, when a member of the Oddfellows saw Old Man Rose on the road. When he noticed the ghost, it was less than 10 feet away from him and facing him. The man was from town and had known Old Man Rose for years. He is sure, because of how close he was and how well he could see due to the moonlight, that the ghost was Old Man Rose. Before the man could speak, Old Man Rose vanished. A few days later, a woman claimed she saw Old Man Rose in her house, and she was willing to testify under oath about the haunting. So far, Old Man Rose has been seen at 5 different locations by 5 different people.
So this guy was kind of a jerk. First he's all, God, it's fake. Then when he's dying, he's all, I'm not scared, but oh no, Satan is coming for me. But also, I'm still not scared. Then he comes back, and instead of visiting his wife, that was probably too good for him anyways, he meets up with some old friends on the road and visits some woman's house? When his wife dies, I hope she lets him have it good for this. Speaking of giving it to someone good, do you wish you could throw a pie at Papa Bone's face? Well, I've got great news for you. You can. It's easy. Just join Patreon. I'll use that $1 a month to throw pie, cake, and sandwiches at my face. I won't be throwing it very fast, and will be aiming mostly for my mouth hole. But still, it counts. If you think me eating is a good idea, head over to patreon.com now and sign up for just $1 a month. So eventually Old Man Rose did go back to see his wife, but by the time he got there, she was so angry she threw salt at him, creating little holes in his ghost body. And now, even though he doesn't believe in God, he's known as the Holy Ghost. Have you ever considered how different people are? I've seen people claim their house was haunted whenever the wind howled or a floorboard creaked. And others could look a ghost straight in the eye and still claim it's not real. In tonight's article, we meet a family that doesn't believe in ghosts. At least, not for now.
It is believed that there is a house in Chartiers Township that is haunted. According to locals, at the witching hour, spirits can be heard walking all over the house and even on its roof. The ghost is called Chartier's Ghost, and it is said to have many forms. It has presented itself as both a black cloud and as a female figure wearing long clothes that drag across the floor. The house is older and in poor condition. It looks like the sort of house that one would expect to be haunted. A family has recently moved in from out of town without knowing about the hauntings. The father of the family who rented the house is a laborer in the city. and his wife and family are generally left alone. The first night they occupied the house, no noises were heard, and it's presumed that if the spirits did appear, the family, being exhausted from moving, slept soundly and did not hear them. After spending one night at the new home, the father went to the city for work, and the wife and children were left alone. That night, the spirits appeared. They glided from one room to another, upstairs and downstairs, through the hall, over the roof, out of the windows, across the yard. Anywhere and everywhere they could go to create the most surprise and terror. The lady of the house was courageous and did not panic at the happenings, but instead planned to scare off whatever was causing the madness. The next day, she brought a ferocious dog to the house. With the dog being in the house, the wife and children felt safe and were sure there wouldn't be any trouble that night. But when the shadowy ghost appeared again, even the bold dog was afraid. His tail fell suddenly, and there was not any more fight or growl in him. Even after the dog hid from the ghost in fear, the lady of the house refused to believe that there was anything supernatural about the events. She decided she would stay in the house a few more days, expecting the mystery to clear up. She sent her husband a message, telling him of the strange occurrences and asking him to come home to see what was happening. The husband, much like his wife, did not believe in ghosts and was convinced all of the hauntings were nothing more than rats in imagination. Still, on the off chance someone was playing an ill-fitting prank on his family, he decided he would return home and invited a few of his workmates. That night the men were having a pleasant evening. They were laughing and drinking, carrying on about how they would like to have a drink with the ghost or speak with the ghosts that were haunting the house. Their merriment was ended when the sound of clanking chains was heard. One man got up quickly and said, "There must be something going on in the stables," so he left to look in on the horses, but he found everything was in its proper condition. Before the men could again start drinking and making merry, the ghost-like cloud appeared. For all the talk of wanting to have a drink with the ghost and speak with the ghost, the men said nothing. The father of the house declared, "Seeing is believing," and he immediately woke up his wife and children and took them from the house.
Whoa! Someone give those ghosts a badge for getting non-believers to believe. It's funny how that works out. The husband and his friends sitting around, wishing a ghost would come talk to them, drink with them, but then when it shows up, they all panic and run. It's because people don't think things through. Hearing a story is significantly less creepy than living it. Now the husband thinks everything through and is constantly scared. His wife thought teaching him to bake might help him relax, but he said even that was too whiskey. Get it? Whiskey?
There is a haunted tunnel in the municipality of Wheeling, West Virginia. The tunnel itself is no stranger to the papers, as a number of murders have sadly taken place there. Last Thursday, at about 6 p.m., 4 men began passing through the tunnel. The sun wouldn't set for a couple more hours, but the inside of the tunnel was darker than any moonless night. It was as if the darkness was hungry and would eat any light that entered it. As the men walked, they began to hear groans and the sounds of different people begging for mercy. This collection of sounds was even more oppressive than you might expect. because of the echo created by the tunnel. These sounds whirled around the men. The men stood there, paralyzed by fear, doing their best to identify where the sounds and potential dangers were coming from. All at once, coming from the solid rock which formed the ceiling above them, and directly over a spot where a man had been murdered, a ghastly form appeared. Now remember, the men had trouble seeing anything in this oppressive darkness. But for some reason, even with the ghost being some distance away from them, they were able to see it clear as day. It was as if he was unaffected by the darkness. The spirit descended, feet first, until it reached a place about halfway from the floor and the ceiling of the tunnel, where it stopped and remained for a few seconds. Although covered with the slime and earth of the grave, the features of the ghastly specter were distinctly visible. It wore the clothing you would expect someone who was getting buried to wear. The face and hands of this ghost were both covered in blood, and it pointed to what looked like a gunshot wound on its head. Without moving its lips, a voice, apparently coming from the throat of the ghost, exclaimed, in a tone so unnatural it's totally undescribable,
"Let the dead rest."
The horror-stricken witnesses of this appalling spectacle rushed from the scene. At the mouth of the tunnel, they ran into another party and immediately shared what they'd just experienced in the tunnel. Because of the sensational nature of the account, the others did not believe and quickly went in themselves. When they reached the place where the apparition appeared before, they began examining the walls, floors, and ceilings. Anything that could explain what the men claimed they saw. This did not last long. The spirit again presented itself as it had previously done, and, with an even more horrifying tone, again said,
"Let the dead rest."
The group was so afraid they barely spoke for days, and appeared to even be afraid of explaining to others what they'd seen in the tunnel. With all of the eyewitness testimonies coming from credible people, the story of the tunnel haunting quickly spread. One man, who has remained anonymous, admitted to also seeing something. He claims he didn't say anything because he didn't want to be thought of as a fool and ridiculed. The man lives within a few miles of the tunnel, and was intending to use it to get to a nearby town. It was late in the evening, and he noticed a couple of persons walking about 100 yards ahead of him. He was looking down to guard his steps when he suddenly felt a shiver run down his spine. When he looked up, he saw a man standing a few yards ahead on the track directly in his path. His arms were held up as if he was trying to protect himself during a fight, and his face was bloodied. There was an awful stony glare in his eyes, which rooted the observer to the ground. His first thought was that it was one of the men who had been walking ahead of him. Maybe one of the men assaulted the other. But before he had time to follow out the thought, he glanced past the horrid spectacle and saw the two men just about to pass into the tunnel. At that instant, the man, specter, or whatever it was, vanished and was nowhere to be seen. Completely and utterly confused, the frightened man stood gazing at the vacant air, trying to comprehend what he'd seen. In a moment or two, he had recovered sufficiently to think. He looked around carefully. Nothing was out of place. He says he thought at one moment of running forward and telling the men who were ahead, and asking them if they had seen anything. But he reflected that of course the apparition was not there when they passed. The man abandoned his trip right there and quickly returned home. The stories in this video are not stories at all, but articles. Articles about paranormal events that were published in real newspapers 100 years ago.
Hey, Super Horror Fam! I know I would normally have something to say to set the scene a little, but this article's payoff is so good, I didn't want to risk spoiling it. So, I'm just gonna let it play, and then we'll have ourselves a laugh after.
Something strange is going on in Mill Creek, a normally quiet neighborhood 4 miles north of York, Illinois. While most investigations into paranormal events often hit dead ends with people being too embarrassed to speak out, there are many families in the town that are quite comfortable discussing the happenings. As far as we can tell, the chain of supernatural events started at the house of John Haddix. According to the Haddix family, furniture would routinely be tossed about, smaller items would be spun around as if taken up by a strong wind, and knives and forks were thrown from the cupboard drawers. During these episodes, no one was safe. A young boy was unfortunate enough to be inside when the commotion started and left with a fairly serious injury. Several adults left the residence with marks they received from the items being thrown around. The entity is very destructive. People aside, the entity has destroyed eggs, jars of fruit, and even threw some clothing in the fireplace. Now there are reports here and there of similarly strange phenomena, but this story has a twist in it, that the hauntings are taking place during the day, where many exclusively take place at night. Persons from all parts of the USA are planning trips to Mill Creek to see its ghost, with a few hoping to discover what has caused these strange events. An old woman of the neighborhood was originally credited with the phenomena and accused of being a witch. There was even talk of lynching the old woman, but she vehemently denied being a witch or having anything to do with the occurrences. After her denial, she was no longer bothered. Some in the town are terrified at the thought of the continued hauntings, while others are actually glad of it. According to the reports from nearby neighbors, John Haddix's wife died last year, and, on her deathbed, promised her husband that she would come back and haunt him if he employed a specific woman to keep house for him. He eventually did employ this young woman, and within days, the hauntings began. For whatever reason Miss Haddix had to make the threat, it appears Mr. Haddix should have taken it more seriously.
When I read that last bit about his wife telling him not to hire that woman, I nearly fell out of my chair laughing. I love everything about it. The original conversation. Don't you dare hire Hannah! She has the heart of a harlot! If you do, I will come back and haunt you! And the husband was all, yeah, whatever, I do what I want. And now she's there throwing all his stuff around. World's greatest, I told you so. So I did a little digging and found out why Miss Haddix didn't want her husband hiring Hannah. It turns out there was a limbo contest at the church festival and Hannah was caught cheating. That's when Miss Haddix found out just how low Hannah could go. Tonight's article is about a galloping ghost. A ghost that's riding a horse. I found this especially intriguing because it's technically two ghosts together, isn't it? I've heard of ghost animals, but I don't think I've heard of a ghost animal that travels with the ghost human. But let's make things even stranger for a moment. I have heard of ghosts that drive ghost cars. Why is the car there? It doesn't have a spirit. Is it there because the ghost driver needs it? Could it just be some sort of residual energy? And to take things one step further, is the horse in the article really the ghost of the animal? Or is it transportation needed by the apparition?
ghost on horseback has been appearing in the town of Bodoinham. He first appeared on the Hunter's Moon, leading some of the locals to call him the Hunter. Others know him as the Ghost of Old Cabin because of his preference to ride on paths that were used during the Revolutionary War, but have fallen out of use since. The ghost only appears on full moon nights. According to locals, when the moon is full, the ghost comes galloping down Lisbon Road and rides all the way up to Sunnycrest Farm. Once there, he makes himself known, terrorizing the farmers by riding around, knocking on all the doors and windows of the property. Should one of the farmers answer the knock, the specter takes off, disappearing into the night. As it's to be expected, the farmers and those living near Lisbon Road are much disturbed by the galloping ghost.
What was it about that farm that attracted the specter? Was there a captain that needed something from the farm? Or maybe the townspeople have misinterpreted these events entirely. Maybe it's the residual energy of someone trying to warn them. Sometimes I wish I could just go back and investigate these accounts further. Speaking of wishes, did you know for $1 a month you could help me feed this dog? This is Jack the Horror Hound. He likes walks, his bed, and food. It's a good thing he found me, because those are all actually my favorite things too. So please consider helping me and Jack eat food. Visit patreon.com/superhorrorshow. Unless you hate Jack. You better not hate Jack. The farmers decided to try using magic to keep the ghost from coming by. They tried putting vinegar, garlic, rosemary, anything they could think of around the property. But no matter what they tried, he wouldn't stop horsing around! School. For some, a great place to explore new ideas and creative solutions. For others, the graveyard of dreams. For me, a great place to meet horror babes! But for the person in tonight's article, a school would become his final resting place.
It is rare to see anything official come as the direct result of a haunting, but that is exactly what happened in Carroll County, Indiana. Carroll County, Indiana will be having a new schoolhouse built because its current schoolhouse is being haunted by the ghost of a murderer. Several years ago, Amer Green was lynched by a mob for murdering Luella Mabbitt. It came as a shock to all, as Amer appeared quite enamored with the young woman, and she him. Once caught, the mob dragged him to a tree in the Walnut Grove schoolyard to be hung. Since then, the children have been filled with superstitious terror. Many parents are also uncomfortable with the event, and as a direct result, many were not sending their children to school. The children, however, were not the only ones affected. The teachers in the school also reported hearing sounds around the building that could not be accounted for. Maybe one of the strangest occurrences is the tree itself. Its leaves never came back after the lynching. It just stands there, a reminder of a terrible event in Walnut Grove. Trustee Jesse Martin of Jackson Township has given a contract for the building of a new school for Walnut Grove because of the hauntings.
I've been around long enough to know that elected officials don't just run around spending money on schools. Things must have been really bad. It's a good thing they even had the money for a new school at all. Having money aside for when things break or become haunted is important. That's why I have Patreon. A lot of things go into making this show. Computers, portable hard drives, and tacos. If one of these things broke or became haunted, it would need to be replaced. Patrons help me shoulder that expense by sharing $1 a month with me. Because let's be honest, if your taco becomes haunted, you should probably just throw it away and get a new one. No one in 2021 should have to eat a haunted taco. It's a basic human right. So if you enjoy the show, please consider sharing some loose change with me every month. It really helps. So the new school was built, and you'd think at the new school things would be fine. But I heard on the first day, they had a kidnapping. The good news is, a few minutes later, the kid just woke up. Get it? Woke up?
Semi-Weekly South Kentuckian, March 29th, 1887. In the northern part of Bucksville-Logan County, in an area known for its mountainous terrain and thick forest, there are reports of a haunted cabin belonging to a Mr. Glidewell. While many haunting accounts occur in areas that are in a state of disrepair or completely abandoned, this spiritual entity has chosen one of the most picturesque places in the county. And despite the efforts to dislodge it, it stubbornly remains. Outsiders hearing the stories are quick to provide reasons to dismiss the accounts, but neighbors of Glidewell are terrified. You see, this ghost has been increasing the area it haunts within the house. At first it remained upstairs. The normal haunting symphony of moans and groans could be heard, but scarier than those was the sound of moving furniture. This ghost, or ghosts, were able to, and regularly did, drag and rearrange the furniture of the upstairs rooms. This meant the ghosts were able to manipulate even heavy objects, and might be able to offer personal violence to any person that would attempt to stop them. The ghost also pulled sheets off of beds and ripped up carpets. On one occasion, a room that was locked closed and wasn't used for years had a fire burning in it. Glidewell insisted he did not start the fire, and being that the room was locked, no one else would have access to it. The Glidewell family woke up one night to the sound of a violin playing, coming from the same locked room that had the fire. But everyone was too afraid to confront the spirit. It was decided that someone would run out and get the neighbors over, either to help or at least witness the happenings. At the mention of getting the neighbors, the sounds stopped. When the neighbors arrived, a group cautiously entered the room, but no evidence of a ghost could be found. On the following night, 3 boys from the neighborhood agreed to keep watch of the house in an attempt to get to the bottom of these hauntings. Everything was quiet until an old clock in the family room struck midnight. After the clock finished counting the hours, a sound could be heard. It started low and fragmented. If the clock hadn't just sounded, our boys might have missed it in their tired states. It was laughing. The laughing grew louder and more maniacal. The boys were too scared to move. The sound appeared to come from multiple places. One of those places was a closet. One of the boys, being at least a little braver than the others, grabbed a candle and approached the closet. He slowly opened it, but before he could get a good look inside the closet, his candle was blown out, and he was overwhelmed by water that appeared to come out of thin air. All at once, the maniacal laughter started up again. All three boys immediately ran out of the house. Mr. Glidewell and his family heard the laughing and were rightfully scared. There was nothing else to report that night. The next morning, the family found a skull and crossbones at the head of the dining room table and a small cedar sprig on every plate. By then, they had their fill. They decided to leave the house that day and stay with neighbors. The family was too scared to take anything from the upstairs rooms because that's where the hauntings were most prevalent, but their cautionary measures were taken in vain. While packing things up downstairs, the furniture in the dining room began moving around. The chairs spun around each other as if they were dancing. Glidewell's son grabbed one of them and received what he described as a shot of electricity. After he was shocked, the room was filled with the same maniacal laughter that was heard overnight. Now the house has become an attraction for thrill seekers. During the day, it's not unusual for people to come by and inspect the haunted cabin. Because of its notoriety, Mr. Gulan, the marshal at Auburn, brought a posse of armed men to the cabin. Inside the cabin, the men heard many strange noises, including the laughter. Despite an in-depth search of the property, they were unable to solve the mystery and are now convinced something supernatural is going on. With many ordinary explanations of the events being dismissed, people have begun seeking extraordinary explanations. The most prevalent right now is the cabin is haunted by the ghost of a man that drowned in the creek that runs near the house and who was buried underneath where the cabin now stands. The stories in this video are not stories at all, but articles. Articles about paranormal events that were published in real newspapers 100 years ago.
One of the most difficult parts of communicating with the supernatural or paranormal entities is interpretation. Because direct communication is so rare, we're forced in for a lot when the messages being sent are incongruent. Tonight's article takes us into a very special set of woods, where there are plenty of sights, sounds, some scary, some warning, and some playing.
Something is haunting the woods of Carnesville, Georgia. There have been so many reports that it's difficult to tell exactly what's going on. On the one hand, there have been frightening noises and apparitions seen, not only in the woods, but near where a murderer, Frank Sanders, was lynched. Locals say you can hear owls all night where the lynching happened, including one specific owl with a distinctive voice that appears to never grow tired of hooting or ever leave. This owl, while eerie, is not thought of as a bad omen though, but as a warning of the dangers that lie in the woods. However, others have reported seeing a group of children happily dancing around a fire about 200 yards into the woods. At that distance, the children's features are indiscernible, but their silhouettes can be seen as they circle the flame. On more than one occasion, an adult has attempted to reach the children, who really shouldn't be out so late. As they made their way to the bonfire and the bonfire and children appeared to supernaturally move deeper into the woods. Again, they did not look hurt or frightened. They appeared to be making merry. After pursuing the children and the lights for a time, the locals that made the attempt gave up and returned home. The Hilly family rented a home near the woods where the execution took place. They left shortly after because they witnessed things they believed to be supernatural. The house is now occupied by a Mr. Crawford, who also states he's heard things in the woods that he could not explain. The hauntings are becoming so regular now that people who need to cross the woods are now making a point to do so before nightfall.
Whoa! I can't lie. I'd avoid those woods at night too. So what do you guys think? Those kids dancing around the fire didn't make people afraid. Just curious. Were they friendly, neutral, or some kind of trap? Let me know in the comments what you think. Eventually, the town came together and hired a well-known medium to go over to the woods and speak with whatever was haunting them. She didn't run into children dancing around the fire, or the owl, but did reach the murderer Frank Sanders. She asked Frank about the hauntings in the woods, and he had this to say: "I don't know, but in these woods, anything ghost." Until next time, Super Horror Family, I'll keep you ghosted. I mean, posted! The Lifetime channel is like a horror channel. Only for married women, though. You have cheating husbands, crazy mistresses, and sometimes the husband's a murderer. Well, apparently, these aren't new things.
Everyone in the town of Wheeling is talking about the local haunted house, but there's nothing new about it. The house has been considered haunted by most in the area, and because of that, has been uninhabited for the last 20 years. According to the locals, one night, more than 20 years ago, a husband and wife got into a heated argument. No one recalls how the argument was started, but almost everyone remembers how it ended, with the husband killing his wife. After the deed was done, the man acquired a coffin, put his wife in it, and hid her in the attic. Afterwards, the man disappeared. Some say he was trying to evade the law. Some say the fact that he put his wife in a coffin shows remorse, and his conscience weighed too heavy on him for him to stay. And others say he was the first victim of the hauntings. After the man disappeared, and the man's wife's body was found, the local noticed the silhouette of a coffin that had appeared on the roof of the house. Now back to the present. The house, you'll remember, has been unoccupied for 20 years. Well, it has just been bought, and the first thing the new owner did was to re-shingle the old roof. To everyone's amazement, after the re-shingling, the coffin silhouette has reappeared. Maybe it will never leave.
Her being put in a coffin could be evidence of remorse. There's no way to say, "Sorry I killed you," but being placed in a coffin is way better than being discarded deep in the woods. If this was him showing remorse, why is the silhouette of the coffin on the roof? Is she trying to get the authorities' attention so she can get some justice? Is she just trapped at the house? Or is something else going on? Let me know what you think in the comments. You know, when I see things like this happen, it makes me think about how horses have their mates picked for them, and you never see them kill each other or get divorced. It's probably because they're in stable relationships. I've watched my fair share of horror movies. Sometimes while watching something especially bizarre, my mind will say, the director did this to make it more creepy. Completely forgetting that there are people that have seen the exact same thing in real life. In tonight's ghost story, I've picked an article with the earliest account I could find of a ghost with a very scary, very particular style of movement. Every place gets its fair share of crazy people. No matter where you are, there'll be someone there to tell you about all the strange sights and sounds they've experienced. The neighborhood of Hyde Park in Chicago is no exception. Only this time, the reports are not coming from local drunks, but from law enforcement. It started a long time ago, with people living on State Street between 45th and 49th Street, claiming they would see an apparition walking through the neighborhood at midnight, on all fours. At first, these accounts were considered to be the product of alcohol. We've all seen a man walk home on all fours when he's had too much to drink, and it being so late, and people observing from their windows, it's easy to see how a mistake could be made. But soon after, reports began coming in from streetcar drivers, 2 of which have refused to work their shifts after seeing the ghost. After these reports reached Captain Hunt, he increased midnight patrols in the area, instructing his officers to apprehend the person responsible for the hauntings. When the ghost appeared, he was immediately pursued by a Hyde Park policeman. The officer ran after it, and even fired his revolver several times. When the ghost reached the Grand Boulevard, it suddenly vanished. Several officers have now been detailed to hide and wait for the ghost to appear, with the hope of being able to ambush it. You know, whether you love or hate cops, and I know I've been on both sides of that fence, their accounts are more believable. Cops are seen as a unit, so if one of them sees something crazy, the others will try to keep them from saying anything, because it might make them all look bad. And having several cops and a captain involved, well, let's just say I'm glad I don't live in Hyde Park. If you've lived in Hyde Park, let me know in the comments if people still report seeing this ghost. A few weeks later, a street artist was found dead one morning. Many suspected it was the ghost. Lucky for the cops, it looks like he quickly drew what happened before he died. The cops admitted it could have been the ghost, but they say the details are a little sketchy. We've all seen that guy before. You'll be watching a show or a scary movie, and they insist if they were there, things would be different. They wouldn't be afraid. They would beat the ghost and be the hero. You know what I'm talking about. Well, in tonight's article, we see that guy existed all the way back in 1868.
There is a haunted house in Greensburg, Indiana, situated by the railroad track. Every night at midnight, the house is visited by a ghost that makes itself known by throwing chairs, tables, utensils, anything it can get its hands on. An Irish family tried to live there, but couldn't take it and moved out. The owner attempted to rent the house out again. This second family only stayed for one night before leaving. The owner of the property, being desperate, offered $25 to anyone that could get the ghost to stop making a menace of itself. A young man of little means accepted the job and made his way to the house, prepared to stay the night. Just as the clock in the house struck midnight, slight noises began being heard, soon followed by groans. Then, the sound of doors being opened and shut in the upstairs hall were heard. These events were strange. This was the first time the ghost acted this way. Maybe the ghost knew the young man was there, trying to get rid of it. The young man, too scared to go upstairs to investigate, waited in the room. Suddenly the door opened to the room he was in, and a lady, dressed in black and very pale, entered the room without ever once breaking eye contact with the young man. He got up and started approaching the apparition. It responded by gliding backwards through the wall into the hall that it had come through. The young man ran for the door to pursue her, but when he made it into the hall, she'd already vanished. According to the owner, the house was the scene of a grisly murder, where a man killed his wife by cutting her heart out. He fled the country and did not return until the war. Records show he died in the Battle of Vicksburg. Without hope for a trial or justice, the woman may be destined to haunt the house forever.
I've heard people talk about how there's a decrease in ghost sightings, and they believe it's due to an increase in scientific discovery. Like people today are too smart for ghosts. There's an interesting correlation, but I think the conclusion is way off. First of all, people today are not too smart for anything. I've seen them eat Tide Pods and superglue their hair to their heads. So there's plenty of people not splitting atoms anytime soon. But I will admit, there does appear to be a decrease. I think it's far more likely that people are getting justice more often when they die, thanks to advances in forensic science. What do you guys think? Did an advancement cause this? Is social stigma putting pressure on people, leading to people underreporting? Or maybe it's something else. Let me know in the comments what you think. And while you're down there, take a moment and thank a Patreon. Making horror on YouTube isn't easy. The rules aren't enforced evenly. At any moment, I could have any number of videos demonetized. Patreons help insulate me from YouTube's unilateral enforcement, allowing me to continue creating the most fun horror around. I became curious and did a little digging, and found out that the murdering husband died in the war trying to blow up a horse. According to his commanding officer, I don't know why he wanted to blow up a horse, but that moron didn't get very far. He managed to sneak up behind the horse, pursed his lips together, and picked up the horse's tail. But before he could blow any air into the horse's butt, he was kicked in the head, being killed immediately. Welcome back, my spooky squad. What a creepy adventure we've had tonight. I hope you've enjoyed our trip down the haunted memory lane, and that these stories will keep you up at night, just like they do for me. Now let's get serious for a moment. As we close out our episode of Scary History, I want to remind all of you that these stories are not just spooky entertainment. They're a reminder that the past is always with us, and that the spirits of those who have gone before us still linger in this world. So be sure to show them respect, or you may just end up with a haunting of your own. Also, don't forget to help our channel by leaving us a like, or I'll haunt your soul. Oh, make sure you take good care of yourself, because if you're mean to you, and I hear about it, you'll have to answer to me for that too. All this talk of ghosts and hauntings has me hungry for a tombstone pizza.